Welcome to the Got Academy podcast. Hi, everybody. Welcome to another Got Academy podcast. I'm Gil Kidron, and I'm here with Mr. Benjy Cook. Hello, Benjy.
Hello, everybody.
Hey, so Benjy, you've been on a video once.
Yes.
Education through Harry Potter.
Yes, right.
And you're, among other things, a political activist.
That's right, here in Israel. Yep.
And you're also an American.
That's right. So I'm a dual Israeli and U.S. citizen, so I vote in both elections. I also have to pay taxes in both countries, so don't think it's that great.
And do you have a dual loyalty also?
Ooh, wow. Off the bat, we got started.
I can ask the question.
No, sure.
You live in Israel, you live in Tel Aviv.
I live in Israel, and I think the old American stand by no taxation without representation holds true. So because I contribute to both countries, I feel very comfortable voting and deciding how, politics should work there or affecting them.
Yeah, and I think that every Israeli should have a right to vote in the American elections because it directly affects what's happening here because America is a global empire.
Right. I think anyone in the world might want to say that.
So here we want to talk about how Israel has become an issue not only in American politics, in the partisan politics, but also in the Democratic primaries that started February 3rd, I think it's the Iowa caucus.
Yeah.
And each of the Democratic candidates has a specific take on the Israeli-Palestinian issue and is pushing specific policy, trying to differentiate themselves. We want to cut a little bit through the bullshit, give a realistic take on what things actually mean for us, and of course in the internal politics, Jewish politics, whatever, APAC, J Street and stuff.
Right, yeah, sure.
And other constituencies.
Yeah, I think it's just really interesting how large a role a small country like Israel plays in American politics. So yeah, I think Israel and the Middle East politics in general, but also specifically Israel, have always played an outsized role in American politics. Mm-hmm. And I think it's also really interesting. Now we're wrapped up in the Democratic primary, and that's what we're talking about today. But really, the position people take on Israel and Palestinians, by extension of that, has really changed a lot in Washington over the past 4 or 5 years. So I think the Democratic primary we're seeing is part of a larger trend, and a lot of the divisions and breaks we're seeing now are maybe small cracks that might turn into larger gulfs as we get into this decade.
Some realignments.
I can tell you right now, because I have been there with Israeli officials going back more than 25 years, that they do not seek this kind of attacks. They do not invite rockets raining down on their towns and villages. They do not believe that there should be a constant incitement by Hamas, aided and abetted by Iran, against Israel.
I don't think that anybody would suggest that Israel invites or welcomes missiles flying into their country. That is not the issue. And you evaded the answer. You evaded the question. The question is not does Israel have a right to respond, not does Israel have a right to go after terrorists and destroy terrorism. That's not the debate. Was their response disproportionate? I believe that it was. You have not answered that.
And Bernie Sanders laid out pretty clearly a position I have not seen any politician lay out on a national stage ever, which is to say, look, there is a conflict, and really our sympathies have to be a heck of a lot more with the Palestinians. They are poor, they need our help. I am not always with Netanyahu. I don't know if it will help him. I can see an argument that will massively help him. I can see an argument that will massively hurt him, but it was very interesting, it was very bold, it was very different.
Some realignments with certain demographics getting more power, more of a say in foreign policy as well. Yep. And so the first thing that I want to lay out before we start, and we'll go candidate by candidate, is that it annoys me very much just how shallow most of the commentary and analysis about the situation is. Just like the fact that people say Israel as if it's one monolith entity, While if you look to Brexit, everybody knows there are two sides to the Brexit argument, and this is one side and this is the other side. And you won't say the British, okay, you could say they voted for Brexit, but it's not all of them. You know that there are a lot of people, approximately half, who were against it.
Right.
But here people say Israel is a force for good. Amy Klobuchar said a beacon of democracy in the Middle East.
Right.
What the fuck does that mean?
So
this is just the bullshitest bullshit ever.
So what you're saying is the Palestinians don't get much representation in American political discourse.
And that
Or any.
progressive Israelis and left-wing Israeli thinking doesn't have the same starting point as the basic right-wing view that we are good. It doesn't matter what we do, who is in charge, who's the prime minister, what's the policy, what they're doing. It's just now. It's like, I'm digressing a little bit, but like Pete Buttigieg after the last skirmish in Gaza, he said that Hamas is wrong to fire rockets, obviously, because these rockets, they impede the going back to negotiations and achieving peace. So what the fuck are you talking about? Who's having any negotiations? You think the rockets that they fired now, today, this is the problem?
Yeah, so obviously, yes, there's a large lack of nuance because I think when American politicians get asked a question about Israel, they need to answer to two audiences at least. And we'll get into it, but maybe some of the candidates are actually answering the question. But you have two demographically maybe not that large groups in the United States, but in terms of politics and how much they donate to the political process, huge influence, which is the evangelicals, and the small but powerful cadre of rich Republicans, Jews, so for example, Sheldon Adelson being one of them.
He's also affecting Israeli policy and strategic geopolitical situation.
Right. So their influence so long has kind of maybe even pushed some of the candidates in the Democratic Party to, basically use terms like that. Because, so again, talking about this larger change, really for the longest time, Israel, or being pro-Israel, and we can unpack that term in a second, but being pro-Israel was a nonpartisan issue. It was clear-cut, and there was very few people, certainly no one like as outspoken as maybe perhaps Ilhan Omar and other members of Congress have ever been about Israel. I mean, Jesse Jackson, I think, said a few things in the 90s and stuff, but nothing as big as...
That also obviously has to do with Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu firmly aligning himself with Donald Trump, reviled and hated by all left-wingers and Democrats.
Absolutely. I would remind before Donald Trump, well, let's put it this way. When Donald Trump was still a birther and Obama was president, Netanyahu spoke in front of a Republican Congress, and I don't think any foreign leader has ever
spoken against the administration's policies.
Absolutely. And I don't think the Democratic Party has ever been humiliated like that by any foreign leader. Like, that doesn't even come close. And this is before Trump. And this is before, a bull in a china shop, Donald Trump.
So this is a good segue to the person that was Mr. Obama's vice president. Joe Biden, currently leading in the national polls, still front-runner, favorite, There's
been a lot of talk in Washington over the last several years about the dysfunction in the relationship between President Obama and the Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu. Listen to Vice President Joe Biden here yesterday. He's at an event near D.C., a Jewish Federation event, where he talks about, I've had some differences with Bibi, but he's my pal.
I signed a picture for Bibi a long time ago. I have a bad habit of, no one ever doubts I mean what I say. Sometimes I say all that I mean, though. And I signed a picture a long time for Bibi. He's been a friend for over 30 years. I said, Bibi, I don't agree with the damn thing you say, but I love you. But we really are good friends.
So he is what is generically called pro-Israel, staunchly pro-Israel. He did have a few headbutts, whatever, with Benjamin Netanyahu, with Israel. Remember, like 10 years ago, he came in, and just the same day that he came in, they announced the new settlements, and he left. And he was trying to sometimes be whatever the bad cop, but mostly he had to be the good cop to Obama's bad cop.
Sure. And just to strengthen that, I mean, Joe Biden was on Senate Foreign Relations Committee for, I think, like more than 20 years. I think it could be close to 40 even. Yeah. He was a ranking member of Senate Foreign Relations for a very, very long time. So if you want to look for support from Israel going back into the 90s or 80s, unquestionable. You'll find it there too.
There's no solution for Israel other than a two-state solution. It does not exist. It's not possible to have a Jewish state in the Middle East without there being a two-state solution. And he has played to all the same fears and all the prejudices that exist in this country and in Israel. Bibi Netanyahu and I know one another well. He knows that I think what he's doing is outrageous. What we do is we have to put pressure constantly on the Israelis to move to a two-state solution, not withdraw physical aid from them in terms of their security.
And so he holds he pays his dues. He says he's for the two-state solution. He's against the expansion of settlements. He wouldn't have moved the American embassy to Jerusalem.
But he won't move it back.
He won't leverage aid. He said it's a horrible and preposterous idea to leverage the American aid to change the Israeli government's policies. And basically, he doesn't say anything about what he will do to achieve the vision of the two-state solution. How you, as an Israeli American, you try to imagine him as a president. Yeah. What do you see?
Again, and I think this is what he's offering in the larger sense of his campaign, I see a continuation of the Obama administration's policies. Trying to talk as tough as possible, but always stopping short of any actual change, whether it's budgetary, aid, regulation. I think Obama, right, in the last few months, he let a UN vote go through.
Yeah. So I think that said, "Ooh, Israel, you were bad."
Right, and that was the strongest. I mean, I do want to.
No, he did freeze the settlement building at first, but he didn't understand the way the game that Bibi was playing. Bibi was playing the long game, and maybe this is also something that I can. I guess you agree with me. Netanyahu does not want peace with the Palestinians. It's not something that he yearns for. It's not in his vision. He sees a different solution to this problem, which doesn't include a Palestinian state. He might say that in some conditions, but if you follow politics close in Israel, you know that he just will put IEDs along the way in order to make sure that any negotiation cannot come into fruition.
Yeah, I think the only coherent thing and consistent thing about Netanyahu you can say is that his general approach to everything is tomorrow, and specifically with even saying yes, Palestinian state, no Palestinian state, he'll say tomorrow, which has been overall Israel's policy for the past 50 years.
Tomorrow,
we'll handle it tomorrow.
We had some with Rabin. It was like maybe in a few hours, not tomorrow.
No, you're right.
Trying to move the ball.
There have been efforts, and again, there have been great successes with Egypt and Jordan, which obviously are sovereign nations to begin with, and very different than the Palestinian issue. Yeah, so anyway, getting back to Biden, I just think it would be the same kind of tough talk and not much actual action, again, because he probably can't. He doesn't have the support. I mean,
because his constituency is made up also of donors and people who don't want to rock the boat. And if you start to go crazy on the Israeli-Palestinian issue, I don't know who you're going to annoy and aggravate.
Yep, absolutely. They'll just pivot to a different issue and not really comment on it.
Yeah. So anything that he says, just like taking with a grain of salt. Yeah. Won't try to do anything serious. And I feel that this, honestly, the way that I see the world and the situation here with the Palestinians, his pro-Israel ostensibly policy will go against my own interest, because he will help the people who want to prolong the status quo achieve just that.
Yeah, absolutely. Listen, even John Kelly said sometimes a loving parent needs to be a little tough, or something like that. It's not an exact quote. And this is John Kelly in 2004 or so, I think, saying this. They don't understand how precocious democracy is in Israel today, especially, but also it's always been not great democracy. Yeah. And even the U.S. State Department can sometimes oopsie and rank the Israel on, freedom of the press indexes and stuff like that as not great. Yeah. So, Beacon of democracy, I don't know.
Yeah, okay, so let's pivot to the polar opposite, the guy on the other side of the spectrum, our friend, the friend of the show, hero, hero to all, Bernard Sanders.
Yeah, sure.
So you're a big also, okay, we want
Yeah,
Bernie Sanders
I
to
have
win.
no problem saying I'm going to be voting for Bernie.
Bernie Sanders.
I'm a member of the Dems. I can vote in this thing.
We must understand that right now in Israel, we have leadership under Netanyahu, who has recently, as you know, been indicted for bribery, who in my view is a racist. What we need is a level playing field in terms of the Middle East, which addresses the terrible crisis in Gaza, where 60 or 70% of the young people are unemployed. So what my foreign policy will be about is human rights, is democracy, is bringing people together in a peaceful way, trying to negotiate agreements, not endless wars with trillions of dollars of expenses.
Thank you, Senator.
So how do you see a Bernie Sanders presidency with regards to Israel and
Bernie brings to this issue what he brings to all others, which is his high level of integrity, his actual realization of what the facts actually are, and a willingness to boldly break with tradition.
Sometimes on both sides of his own party?
Yeah, sure. No question. I think Bernie's Jewishness represents what used to be, and maybe no longer is, but definitely used to be mainstream Jewish thought in the United States. I mean, if you look at it, I think 70-80% of Jews supported Martin Luther King. Celebrated his birthday this week. And marched with him and stuff like that. So the pictures of Bernie being arrested in Chicago in the 60s were common amongst Jews. They saw it. And you've seen, like, there are Jewish gatherings now, for example, protesting ICE and the internment camps on the border and things like that, with signs, with strong messages like never again, and really.
But on the other side, now.
I mean, this is what I'm saying, I'm reluctant to comment because I haven't seen recent numbers, but Ben Shapiro does not represent American Jews. He just doesn't. Most people, especially when they're talking about their values, if Ben Shapiro talks about his values, or if Bernie Sanders talks about his values, I mean, not even politics, just basic human values, most American Jews see the world the way Bernie Sanders sees it. And
he just takes those values and applies them to this situation as well.
Right. And why he can so elegantly say, listen, no one's getting rid of Israel. No one wants to annihilate you or throw you into the sea. But there is a basic human equality that all of us share, as, made in the image of God, as the Bible says. And he says, and that's my Jewishness. And he says, it's very simple. You can't maintain, it's not either or. It doesn't mean that the only way to achieve Jewish security and a healthy democratic Israel absolutely means the creation of a Palestinian state, which again just gives insight into the problem that I think some candidates lack as well.
And Bernie, he now, Elizabeth Warren also a little bit is emulating his line, but he's spoken very harshly against Netanyahu and against the Israeli government, and has made the differentiation between the government and Israel as a concept that does not even exist. And I trust that Bernie Sanders, this issue will be important enough for him to push forward and try to get a peace agreement here. And honestly, it's kind of the only positive scenario that I can imagine and envision for the future. Here, something good actually happening in the next 4 years is only with him as president.
Absolutely, and I think that, I have to say, I think Warren's moved a lot on this issue as well. But just one more thing about Bernie before we move on is that I bet you he'd be the first U.S. president to visit, as president, Ramallah before Jerusalem, or the Gaza Strip before Jerusalem. And that's
it depends who will be prime minister.
Sure, absolutely.
If Bibi is not prime minister, and if it's Benny Gantz, the center.
And anyway, this is Bernie you're talking about. This guy goes to Flint before he goes to L.A.
Okay, you called it. Let's see. So why are you so interested in Warren's positions vis-a-vis Israel?
Well, I mean, no one will argue with the fact that Warren is a progressive, but probably slightly to the right on Bernie, and gets into the specific issues exactly where. I mean, obviously, on economic policy, he says I'm a socialist, she says I'm a capitalist. So they're obviously they don't have the same issues. But here, I actually have to commend her. I mean, every time Netanyahu in the past year has done something really outwardly crazy in our democracy, she's spoken up about it as a U.S. senator. And again, I don't know how many senators did that. 4.
It's because she's running for president.
And she's consistent?
I don't trust her on that. She wants to be just a little bit to the right of Bernie Sanders. That's what she wants.
But listen, if beforehand she was kind of with most of the establishment Democrats and just kind of pro-Israel no matter what, and now she's openly more critical because she wants to run for president, I got to say I don't have a problem with that. I think on the other hand, it strengthens the argument that the issue is moving within the party, and she could no longer ignore that.
But I don't trust her if she gets into power that she will actually do something to change the situation. You have to use so much political capital, and this has to be something that is important for you. You remember Clinton in his waning years, some say that he even put himself too much into the negotiations, whatever, that's to be discussed, and that's fine.
Yeah.
But that was important for him. It was important somewhat for Obama, but I can't see it being important at all for Elizabeth Warren. Why would she get into that too much? And because you have to fight with someone here, with everybody, in order to get something moving.
I'll tell you where I think it would be a big difference, because either the election in Israel starts this off, or the election in the United States starts this off. But I really hope that this wave of far-right authoritarianism, Trump, Orban, Netanyahu, Bolsonaro, Salvini, the list goes on, unfortunately. Duterte, Modi, absolutely, God, horrible happening there. Pushing back the wave, Warren she won't stand next to all those people we just mentioned and take a nice picture.
But Biden might?
I don't know, but I'm saying Warren, with regards, because she's outspoken against Netanyahu, and basically Warren said that Trump is corrupt and his buddies are Orban and Netanyahu and other things. And she's repeated this a lot of times.
They're also corrupt.
And this is part of the corruption. Yeah. So again, yes, maybe if the prime minister changes, she'll change her position. But I think just that type of messaging, and not only the United States, but Europe, other nations around the world, start seeing Israel not as a liberal democracy, but as like Modi's an illiberal something, the way Modi's India is or Orban's Hungary is. That changes things. I mean, I don't know, do Israeli startups get a lot of venture funding from Europe? You know, if the feeling around Israel changes. I mean, when South Africa happened, it took a while, but when the ball got rolling, it happened very quickly.
Because it's important to say that no matter who is in power here and with the Palestinians,
it doesn't matter who's in power here.
There's very little appetite to risk something with negotiations. You will need to push both sides, 3 sides, 5 sides, whatever. You have to pressure them in order to do something that is against the political interest, because it's very safe politically to say we want peace, we are good, they are bad, we're trying, but look at this, what they're doing.
Yep.
It's very easy. It's very hard to say, listen, we know it's hard, but in the long term we will see the fruits of our labor, and we have to understand that there will be obstacles, but we will have to. It's a very tough argument to say. It's a tougher argument to sell.
Yeah, I think again, I think in Israeli policy isn't going to change much, no matter who's in power, unless a big shift happens here, which might happen in the next 15 or 20 years. It's possible.
Okay, but you don't think in the next elections, if it's not a Likud government?
I don't think it changes anything. Immediately on the ground?
Even if the settlers are not in the government, or outside the government?
Yeah, I don't think... again, are we pulling out of the West Bank? Are we letting the Palestinians build a embassy, or recognizing Jerusalem as their capital as well? Are we allowing humanitarian aid to flow into Gaza? I don't... I don't know what will happen here in the government, but I don't see that changing unless our stone parent, the United States, forces us to. and that's where you do worry about middle of the road answers.
Yeah.
Because it basically means status quo.
Exactly, because the status quo is very entrenched. It's hard to move. So you have Biden on the most pro-Israel, for lack of a better word right now term. On the one side, you have Bernie, then you have
pro-status quo.
Pro-status quo, and Bernie pro-change, and Warren is a little bit to the right of Bernie, and Pete Buttigieg is trying to be a little bit to the left of Biden, insinuating that he might leverage the aid to do something, and I don't believe anything that he says.
Yeah.
As Israel's most powerful and most reliable ally, the United States has the opportunity to shape a more constructive path with the tough and honest guidance that friendship and fairness require. The current state of affairs cannot endure. The pressure of history and the mathematics of demography mean that well before 2054, Israelis and Palestinians will have come to see either peace or catastrophe. A two-state solution that achieves legitimate Palestinian aspirations and meets Israel's security needs remains the only viable way forward, and it will be our policy to support such a solution actively.
Yeah, I think he just gave a contradictory answer, basically. He said, I'll be soft, but I'll also be strong. Okay.
Yeah, sounds like everything he says.
Yeah. Just getting back to what you said, I also think, again, on this issue, not in general, but on this issue, I don't think there's that much difference between Warren and Bernie. I don't think.
Really?
I wouldn't define on Israel. I wouldn't define Warren to the right of Bernie. I think they're about the same. But they listen. They talk about it in very different terms. Bernie always will wrap in his common humanity, whereas she likes to talk about right and wrong, and we have rules and corruption and this. But within the frameworks of how they speak about issues, which I think the actual policy points would be the same. Again, in terms of what they're proposing, whether they'll be able to accomplish it or not, that's different.
But that's important. It's like the argument, the healthcare argument that Bernie supporters say, that her policy is will not get achieved because she divided it into two and she gave away all kinds of concessions at the beginning, and thus she will not be able to fight for it as hard and for this longer time to get it achieved.
Right.
And this is an important way to judge their takes on Israel, because Bernie Sanders will not sway on Israel. He might not be able to accomplish anything. This is certainly possible, but he will always stay the course and say this is what should be done. Right. Maybe his presidency will be a disaster. Who knows? But Elizabeth Warren, maybe if somebody offers her this and that, so she says, okay, I'll get Wall Street and I'll give you something on Israel, and that's it.
So I can say, if you look at her history and just her work as a senator, she's never done that. She's always stayed strong on her opinions on Israel. She hasn't used it to pass some bill through that she wanted to pass through. So I just look at her record and I actually say, no, I think, again, it's consistent with her worldview.
She did vote for the budget, the military budget, Trump's military budget.
Well, everyone needs to vote for the military budget.
No, Bernie Sanders did not vote for the military budget.
Yeah.
So, okay, we can go whatever. Bloomberg, just again.
I think Bloomberg is just really interesting because, again, you have, if you talk Bernie versus Bloomberg, I mean, if you want to talk about American Jewry and what it's been going through in the past
go for it.
50 years, it's Bernie versus Bloomberg. Contrast of just where American Jewry is at, and also just Jewishness as an identity in the United States.
Okay.
When Joe Lieberman was going to be someone's vice president goals, I think, it was like, oh my God, he's Jewish. And like, there was going to be a vice president and like, fine, okay. But now, two pretty viable candidates for president. I mean, one
of them is very viable.
Right, exactly. And the other one's a billionaire. And they both really represent, I think, different sides of American Jewry right now.
Go ahead.
So a large part of American Jewry, and again, still the majority, I think, find themselves realize that they are, they're the most protected minority in the United States historically. I mean, Jews own slaves, just to be clear. Historically, it's on the books, it happened, you can't deny it. They still realize that they are a minority. And
Right.
in unique points throughout American history,
Even though they look like the majority.
that's right. Jews have used their middle ladder step kind of position in American society to show solidarity with the lower rungs below them.
Yes.
And this goes back to women's votings, the civil rights movement, the anti-war in Vietnam movement, the anti-apartheid in South Africa movement. I mean, the list goes on and on and on and on and on
Yes,
and on.
and it's rooted in the Jewish experience of being a persecuted minority everywhere, and Jewish ethos, whatever, going back to the days we were slaves in Egypt.
I am very proud to be Jewish, and being Jewish is so much of what I am. Look, my father's family was wiped out by Hitler in the Holocaust. I know about what crazy and radical and extremist politics mean. I learned that lesson as a tiny, tiny child when my mother would take me shopping and we would see people working in stores who had numbers on their arms because they were in Hitler's concentration camp. I am very proud of being Jewish, and that is an essential part of who I am as a human being. If there is any people on earth who understands the danger of racism and white nationalism, it is certainly the Jewish people. And if there is any people on earth who should do everything humanly possible to fight against Trump's effort to try to divide us up by the color of our skin or our language, our religion, or where we were born, if there's any group on earth that should be trying to bring people together around a common and progressive agenda, it is the Jewish people.
Absolutely, but even on the stronger sense of realization that the Constitution of the United States and in general American democracy is the strongest safeguard against the horrors seen in Europe and elsewhere around the world against Jews and any minorities. And that's why they can feel so strongly about protecting ICE deporting people who just look Mexican, or a Muslim ban, because today it's most American Jews still remember that, okay, today it's a Muslim ban, tomorrow it's a Jewish ban. They hear Muslim ban, they hear Muslim ban, but they're actually hearing is Jewish ban. The solidarity of most American Jews is that strong. Because again, when it was Jim Crow and this is a black water fountain, this is a white water fountain, they saw yellow stars.
Yeah, because also the KKK doesn't like Jews.
Right. Again, America is a complicated country. Be careful of that because, again, Jews fought for the South, Jews owned slaves.
Yeah.
Jewish African-American relations are sometimes wonderful and sometimes not that wonderful. It changes a lot.
But if the right wing wins, then the people who are now pro-Israel, considered but are actually anti-Semitic in many, many ways, if they win, then the Jews know, okay, now they're coming for us. Because people are under, most Jews, as you say, alt-right, no, that's scary. And I have like an American friend.
Right.
So I was telling him, I was thinking a few years ago, maybe I would move for a few years to New York. And he was just like shocked. He said, no, you guys have to keep this safe haven in case we have to run. And I said, no, I'm running over there. You're not running here.
Right. So this has been a long, discussion amongst Jews in the United States. But again, I think you say this right wing. So Steve Bannon talks a lot about ethno-nationalism. And I would say that ethno-nationalism is mainstream thought in Israeli society. And it's almost seen with this type of resignation of, that's the world. What are you going to do about it?
But not to defend anything, just like the political context is different. It's like from out here, you look at the gun debate in America and you say, like, they're all crazy. But there's a historical, social context for that makes it relevant. Right. It makes it, understandable.
Right.
So here...
Sure. But I think when you ask American Jews about this topic, they don't put their trust of survival in ethno-nationalism and will have a Jewish state. Yes. They put their trust in we'll have a liberal democracy with this constitution, ABC, minority rights, freedom of speech, freedom of worship, all these types of things represent strong minority rights protection, representation, etc.
Which goes against the official policy of the Netanyahu government for the last 10 years.
Absolutely, absolutely.
So this is important to say. Most Jewish Israelis support what most American Jews reject.
Yes.
So like the two communities are very, very far apart and are getting farther apart, and it's getting harder to bridge that gap with tiptoeing and tap dancing on the issues.
Absolutely. As the occupation in Israel has become more brutal, and as efforts such as we talked about in the 90s didn't pan out, American Jews become more and more despondent and despaired from Israel, and the most progressive parts of them just don't want anything to do with it anymore. And again, do find we joked in the beginning of about dual nationality, but the most progressive wings of the American Jewry, and I completely understand this, are fed up and don't want anything to do with Israel anymore, because they find that they've been tarred with the same brush as Israel their whole lives as Jews, and that bothers them very much as progressives because they don't like Israel policies. And that is very, very sad to see. And one of the things I do in my work is try to figure out how the progressive community in Israel, who's working from within Israel to change things in our own government, well, obviously we're still a minority, but working to change that, and how the same progressive movement in the United States can support these efforts.
Yes.
But it is very, very difficult. And again, you were talking about how almost invisible Palestinians are in this discourse in the United States. So saying, well, we're progressive Israelis, don't forget about us, is hard when the Palestinians are seeing so little representation. And they're finally seeing some, and you're like saying, well, actually...
that is true, but I want to push back a little bit. So I think we talked about it, not... on the air, that the way we see it here, you have AIPAC, center, mostly people will consider them center, even though they're center-right, most people here. You have J Street, which are on the left, the very left end of the spectrum. When you go to...
As Israelis see it.
Yes.
Yeah, sure.
But then you talk to some American Jews that are progressive, then they will see J Street on the middle, and the left, they would say, is just stop all aid, stop doing anything, and also a lot of support. I don't know, a lot of support, but growing support somewhat, at least with people who have platforms and stuff for BDS, and pushing policies that I think are like a little bit like right-wing policies, in terms of like there's a vision that things will work out. We don't have to look how we solve the problem and what is the consequences to the problems. We'll just say that there's a right for this, and hence, and because of this, you have to just do everything you can, basically, to do regime change here, changing the regime from the Israeli government, not having an Israeli government and a Palestinian government. Of course, there will be problems with that. We don't have to sugarcoat it. But just saying, no, we want to have a different regime here. Right. A dual Israeli-Palestinian regime. You have to reconfigure the government, and the army, and the police, and it's not feasible in any sort of way, and will just destroy everything here, and will not further progressive policies in any sort of way. And I find that I don't think you agree with me. I find that the lack of a coherent plan with the progressives on that front, I find it very, very distressing. Very, very distressing.
Right. So, first of all, I think without American aid, there is no Israel. So when you talk about, well, prevent the aid, but then they're also talking about big structural changes, prevention of the aid, all of it, if you're talking about all of it, basically means that we no longer have a budget. And the shekel, good luck with that. I'll move all your money into gold, my friend, if that happens. Bitcoin. If an American president, and again with the backing of the American people in Congress, etc., wanted to, they could shake things up here.
Yes.
So just in terms of, again, I understand what you're saying. I don't think I've seen many coherent people saying, and this is how we'll shake things up here, A, B, C, and at the end you get the federation you were talking about, whatever the solution is. But, I mean, I think there's the big thing that American progressives are missing out is that, do you know why Harry Truman greenlit this entire project?
Okay, why?
Oil.
Okay.
A foothold in the Middle East, because it's the 50s and they realized that they need oil. I mean, Hitler lost because he didn't have oil, basically. He was just trying to reach oil in the... And the whole world saw that. And as the UK empire and their influences were crumbling, and this gets to Iran, this gets to Saudi Arabia, this gets to the entire American involvement in the United States. In
the Middle East.
In the Middle East, sorry. They saw Israel was seen as part of this kind of solution that you could have.
The outpost of democracy.
Right. In combination with the British promise and that.
Yeah.
So,
and also, you can look, people do that. Look at, for example, the 1973 war, Yom Kippur War, a very, very big and bloody war here in the Middle East. It's just two pawns fighting against each other in the Cold War. I think it was Khrushchev back then,
yeah, sure.
Or whatever, just like pushing the Egyptians to do this and the Syrians do that. They had the Soviet military, we had the American military, we had an air train, we call it here, for like American weapons during the war. Basically, it was just like Vietnam.
Sure.
But less bloody, thankfully.
So I think once the oil runs out / we're off oil, you're going to see American foreign policy, including Israel in the Middle East, completely and totally change. And be America first. That's the moment where if Israel hasn't solved on its own the issue with the Palestinians, I don't know if they keep existing.
It will be very, very, it's just the situation will deteriorate. This is why another reason that I want, maybe the major reason that I want Bernie Sanders to win is because I see here a window of opportunity. So basically we laid out different trends that are going on. And Bernie Sanders, so obviously he will be smeared as a self-hating Jew, whatever, but it will not catch on as it did with, the African Obama. It will be harder for people here to hate him. He will have a better starting off point, let's say that. And he's very firm in his understanding and beliefs with regards to the issue and with regard to how much we need change, and you need to pressure the political players to enact those very, very radical changes. And if it's somebody else that wins, God help us if it's Trump, then just it will be some more meandering, and then the next guy that will come up and win, next person that will come up and win in 2024 or 2028, his or her policies towards Israel would be more isolationist and maybe more ideological. I think this progressive view on Israel, looking at it, basically the only case that I see, just like in black and white terms, and not trying to understand history, why things are the way they are, which we can understand in many, many other countries. What brought this situation upon us? We don't have to agree with the situation, but why is it the case? And from that, how can we solve it? And I don't know.
I think it's a very real concern you bring up about if this far-right alignment between Israel and the United States continues, especially in both countries, with, say, Netanyahu and Trump or whatever it is. That's a real danger 10 years from now, 8 years from now. Yeah. But the thing you said about Bernie, I would disagree with, is that I think it might even be worse for him and the things they're going to say about him if he really tries to push Israel hard to the negotiation table with the Palestinians.
Why and how?
Well, I think we've got a glimpse of this with Jeremy Corbyn in the UK, and we've started seeing bits of it from certain people in American Jewry on the right, or center establishment, where it's they see the world in such an upside down place. So Israel is Judaism. Judaism is Israel. Judaism is not
just a religion,
but
ethnicity, whatever, nationality, whatever.
Which then means it conflicts with American nationality, which I don't think it does. And again, most American Jews don't think it does. So once you do that logic twist, now being anti-Israel is being anti-Jewish. You call it self-hating Jew, it's going to be much, much, much stronger language. So they're going to call him a Judenrat here in Israeli press.
What is Judenrat?
Judenrat is the kind of internal Jewish police that would kind of manage the ghettos during the Holocaust in Europe. So they will basically deputize Jews that pushed other Jews around.
By the Nazis, they were
deputized by the Nazis. And they were very controversial.
Yeah. They had privileges.
Right, absolutely. So very controversial place in Jewish thought and just the history of the Holocaust, because on the one hand, people ask, well, did they have a choice? Did they not have a choice? On the other hand, many of them sent their Jewish brothers to the gas chambers.
But they saved their families, their friends, people who didn't know. Like they did save other people.
Right. So without totally getting into that, it's a very loaded term. If Israel and Jews and Israel is the same, and then we're talking about, they're going to call him a Judenrat, this very, very loaded term from the Holocaust. And yeah, it's
going to be horrible.
It's going to be
horrible. If he runs against Trump, if he wins and he's versus Trump. So on the one hand, you have a person who is supported by Nazis and anti-Semites.
But also certain elements of Jewish...
Yeah, like 30%, give or take, 5%
Sure, Sheldon Adelson, Ben Shapiro, to name a few people.
And on the other hand, you'll have a Jewish person who is everything, as you said, that traditionally Jewish American community is.
Yes.
And the Jewish government in Israel will support, if it's Bibi Netanyahu, will support the guy supported by the Nazis and the anti-Semites.
Yes, because again, it's in Netanyahu's interest for this Jews equals Israel equation to be upheld. And it's in Trump's interest for it to be upheld. It's in the evangelists' interest for it to be upheld. So they're going to see it that way. And probably the mainstream media in the United States would fall for it hook, line, and single. I mean, Trump especially, we've seen time and time again, really, I mean, I almost don't blame him because he just doesn't understand the nuance. He doesn't understand. He really just thinks that, yeah, Israel's Jews and Jews are Israel, and Jared should be the envoy because, what do you mean? He's Jewish, and it's that Jew country they got. I mean, I really think that's probably what he thinks about it.
For sure. According to what we see, how he looks at other ethnicities and races, and according to stuff that he said also about the Jews and about Israel.
Yeah,
also.
Sure.
So we haven't yet touched the American mainstream media, which is maybe the main reason, or not the main reason, but part of the reason why the discourse around Israel is so shallow in the U.S., because it's it's just as if there are all both sides or all the different sides are shouting talking points at one another. And it's just like you watch an interview, a segment, and then you don't understand anything. You just don't understand anything. And this is why so many people say that they feel that they don't understand what's going on in Israel. They're apprehensive about maybe pushing forward like a strong opinion because this is so complicated. And I'm like, okay, most people know more about the situation here in Israeli politics than maybe most people know about the politics of Brazil.
Sure.
But you don't have to be an expert in Brazilian politics to know and to have a firm opinion about Bolsonaro and what he's saying about minorities over there and his climate policies and all that. And I think the same standard can and should be applied here. No, you understand what's going on.
That's wishful thinking. Bolsonaro doesn't have a multi-million-dollar propaganda operation running 24/7, being like the most innovative thing ever, called Hasbara.
Hasbara.
If you don't know what that is, just Google it.
No, talk about Hasbara.
So we have this very secretive. This isn't new, but this is like kind of the newest incarnation. This very secretive government ministry called the Ministry for Strategic Affairs. Now, their budget is completely secret. I mean, Gil and I, as Israeli citizens, are paying for this, but we can't tell you exactly how much we're paying and what for, but it appears that we're paying for our own little army of Twitter trolls and Facebook bots and all those wonderful things to talk about how Israel wants peace and everything we do is peace.
And how we are a democracy, a great democracy, while at the same time working against organizations that shall remain nameless, working against their abilities to help democracy thrive in Israel.
Absolutely, and also pushing extremely hard, whether it's in Europe, whether it's the United States, this idea that Judaism is Israel, Israel is Judaism, which of course will only lead to more anti-Semitism as Israel's policies, rightfully so, become less and less popular all around the world. Jews who absolutely do not agree with these policies, and many times are the most outspoken opponents of these policies, also suffer the most from these policies. And we've been seeing it time and time again with these unfortunate anti-Semitic attacks in the United States and in Europe and everywhere else.
Yeah, the same guys, same people who are in line with the allies of this right-wing Israeli government.
Yes, and this is where, again, you were talking about your critique to progressives. I don't share many of those critiques, but I do think of one thing is where they need to remember that American Jewry, especially, and really Jews all over the world, most of them are their allies and not their enemies. Yeah. And they might not like Israel, which is completely their right, especially as American citizens, European citizens, wherever you are, you have your right to your own opinion about Israel, absolutely. But don't be racist or anti-Semitic towards Jews. I mean, they're completely unrelated.
Boom. Okay. That's a good... that's basically what I want to say. Stop being anti-Semitic. People, we have too many anti-Semitic listeners. Shame.
Yeah, I think it's just stop. Yeah, it's...
It was a long road to get to that point. People, stop being anti-Semitic. Cut it out.
Yeah, it's interesting. I do think that it is a wedge issue between like Bernie and Warren and the rest of the camp more than other issues are. And it'll be interesting to see as the campaign picks up if, because I have a feeling that Israel will flare up. Maybe we'll have to relate it to Iran and the Iran deal and stuff like that. But yeah, I have a feeling we haven't heard the last about the Middle East and Israel specifically in this campaign.
Okay, let's see. Thank you, Benjy.
Thanks, Gil. Thanks, everyone.
Thanks, everyone, for listening in. I hope you found that interesting and insightful. And we'll see you all next time. Bye, everybody. Go Bernie.